The morning of her wedding, Cecily Vane counted the stitches in her left glove rather than look at the man she was about to marry. She had sewn them herself 6 years ago, when her hands had been steadier and her expectations of the world rather more generous. 24 stitches along the inside seam, where no one could see the repair. She had learned early that the most important work is always invisible. She did not yet know that by nightfall she would understand why. Had she known, had someone whispered in that cold vestibule that the ring she was about to receive would be back in her hand before the sun cleared the nave, she would have stood just as still and counted just as carefully, and walked down the aisle exactly the same. Some things you walk toward with your eyes open, not because you are brave, but because you have nowhere else to go. She was 22, a rector's orphaned daughter with £40 a year and a reputation for keeping good accounts. The Duke of Aldenbury had chosen her for those accounts and little else, which was understood by everyone present, including Cecily. She had understood it when his solicitor arrived at her cousin's house in September. She had understood it when the settlements were drawn in language so careful that love appeared nowhere in the document, not even as a courtesy word. She had understood it when the Duke himself came to make his offer and stood at the window the entire time, watching the lane, as though he expected someone more interesting to arrive. She accepted him because her cousin's charity was running thin and the cold was coming, and £40 does not keep two women warm. The wedding was to be held in the village church of Aldenbury, which meant 300 people crammed into a building built for 60, and every one of them watching her face. This was November, raw and gray, the sky the color of old pewter. The elms along the lane had given up their last leaves a fortnight ago. The season felt accurate. Her one advantage, the advantage she had always had and always been careful not to show, was that she could read a room the way a physician reads a pulse. She could walk into a gathering and know within 60 seconds who was afraid of whom, who was performing and why, and whose smile was a door held shut. She had developed this faculty at 15, when she first understood that plain, penniless girls do not survive on prettiness. They survive on information. She used it now. Standing at the vestibule door while the organ rehearsed something mournful, she read the church the way she had once read her father's parish accounts, methodically, looking for the entry that did not balance. 300 faces, all arranged in the usual formation of weddings, the curious, the bored, the faintly envious, and one face that did not belong to any of those categories. Cecily had been to 3 weddings in her life, and she knew the particular attention a congregation pays when something is wrong. Not alarm, not yet, but the small electric alertness that passes from person to person when a room decides something interesting is about to happen. She could see it moving through the pews like a ripple across still water. She tracked it to its source and found her there in the 4th pew on the left, precisely positioned where a wife would sit if a wife had been invited. The woman was beautiful in the absolute uncomplicated way that is almost boring in its completeness. Dark hair coiled beneath a hat that had cost more than Cecily's entire quarterly allowance, a gown the color of cream, which is not mourning and is not quite celebration, and is therefore something else entirely. She sat with the posture of a woman who had attended every important occasion in this man's life for years, which she had. The Duke had not troubled to conceal her. He had not seated her in the back, or off to the side, or outside in the lane with a good view of nothing. He had placed her, or she had placed herself, in the position of maximum visibility, at the most unignorable angle to the altar. Cecily looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then she looked at the Duke, who was already standing at the altar, and she saw the small thing that confirmed everything. He did not glance at the 4th pew. not once. A man who does not know someone is in his church glances around. A man who has arranged for someone to be in his church does not need to look. The organist played the opening chord. Agnes materialized at her elbow, breathless and pink. Agnes was kind in the way that very comfortable women often are, abundantly, at low personal cost, and with a slight air of receiving credit for it. She had managed Cecily's poverty for 6 years, with cheerful efficiency and a conviction that marriage was the natural cure for having no money. "You look, Cecily, you look perfectly composed. That is exactly right. You always know the correct thing." Agnes pressed her gloved hand. "Are you ready? I want to ask you something before we go in." "Now?" "The music has started." "When did you know," she asked, "that it was him and not someone else? Who is the woman in the 4th pew on the left in the cream gown?" Agnes's hand went very still. "Agnes, this is not the moment to discuss. It is the only moment." Agnes looked at her with the expression of a woman who has been keeping a secret and has just realized that the person she was keeping it from has known it for some time. She was. Before the engagement was announced, she and the Duke were, it has been a long association. How long? 7 years. And she is here because... Agnes drew a breath through her nose. Because he did not ask her to stay away. The organ completed its phrase and began again. Waiting, Cecily considered this for a moment. She considered the £40 a year, the cold coming, her cousin's thin charity, the settlements written in language that had no room for the word love. She considered what it would cost to walk into that church, and what it would cost to walk into the years after it. "Then he will not mind," she said, "if I give this back." She drew the ring from her glove pocket, the betrothal ring, which had been delivered by a solicitor rather than a hand, and set it in Agnes's palm, which was still extended from their hand-clasp, which Cecily thought was a mercy, sparing them both the performance of Agnes deliberately opening her hand to receive it. She smoothed her left glove once, corner to corner. 24 stitches. All holding. "Tell him I have walked home," she said, "and do try not to look so frightened. One of us has to be sensible." She did not run. Running would have been a spectacle. Walking was simply a woman leaving a church. She was halfway down the lane before she heard Agnes cry out behind her. The Duke of Aldenvire had not been called Marcus in 9 years, not since his father died and took the last person who used the name. He had been your grace ever since, sometimes my lord from old servants who could not be broken of it, sometimes Aldenvire from men who considered themselves his equals, which was most of them. He had answered to all of these without particular feeling, which was the truest description of his life in general over the past 9 years, answering without feeling, moving without choosing, executing the duties of the duchy the way a well-made clock executes its purpose, accurately and without the slightest interest in doing it. He had proposed to Miss Cecily Vane for 3 reasons he had listed to himself in that order. First, the duchy required an heir, and he had arrived at 31 without producing one. Second, his man of business had described her as the best pair of eyes for an account book he had encountered outside a professional house, which was relevant because his man of business had been stealing from him for 2 years, and he needed someone who could not be deceived. Third, she would not pretend to love him, which meant he would not have to perform loving her, and the relief of a marriage without performance was worth considerably more to him than his solicitor understood. He had not spoken of Vivienne to her. This was the thing he had done for which there was no defense, and he knew it. He had told himself that the arrangement with Vivienne was concluded, which it was, in the sense that he had written the letter and she had received it. He had not told himself that Vivienne would come to the church, which was because some part of him had understood very well that she might, and had chosen not to prevent it, and had not examined why. He was examining why now, standing at an altar in an empty church with 300 people, making the careful sounds of people who are deciding whether to remain seated or admit that the entertainment was over. Agnes' focus arrived at his elbow with the ring in her open palm, and a face that had resolved itself, with evident effort, into something resembling calm. "She has gone home," Agnes said. He looked at the ring, looked at the door. A cold drought came through it, smelling of November and dead leaves and a world from which he had just been, with great composure, expelled. "She walked," Agnes said, with a precision he suspected was deliberate. She did not run. He had met Cecily Vane exactly 4 times. In those 4 meetings she had said, in aggregate, perhaps 200 words to him, half of which were about the management of the home farm and the timber accounts, and all of which were exact and useful. He had watched her read a room, he had seen her do it at their first meeting, the quick circuit of the eyes, the small settling adjustment, the information gathered and filed, and he had recognized it because he did it too, having learned at a young age that survival in a family like his required constant surveillance. He had not told her this. He had told her almost nothing. He had stood at the window and watched the lane because Vivienne had written to say she might come, and he had not known how to stop it without stopping also the secret he had been carrying for 2 years, which was that he was afraid. Not of Vivienne, not even of the marriage. He was afraid that if he asked anything of anyone, trust, kindness, honest accounting of the human variety, rather than the ledger variety, he would find, as he had always found, that the price was higher than the thing offered. He looked at the empty doorway for a long time. Then he took the ring from Agnes's palm, his right hand, which had been broken badly in a riding fall 7 years ago and had healed imperfectly, flexed once around it. "Which way home?" Agnes blinked. "The North Lane. But she will have a considerable start." "I have long legs." He glanced back at the assembled congregation, who were now wholly open in their interest. At the magistrate's wife, at his mother's old friend Lord Fenwick, who had managed the duchy's legal affairs for 30 years, at the 400 years of Aldenvira precedent watching him from the carved pews. He said to no one in particular, "There will be refreshments in the hall. I cannot say when I will return." He walked out of his own wedding. It had been long enough since he had moved quickly that he had forgotten the particular satisfaction of it. He was down the lane in 3 minutes, through the Lick Gate in 4, and he saw her at the first bend, walking with the particular quality of attention that he had noticed before, her gaze moving across the hedgerows and the sky, rather than at the mud. As though she was making a thorough record of the world she was passing through. She had not, as far as he could tell, hurried at all. He said her name. She stopped, did not turn immediately. He watched her decide. He could see the decision being made in the set of her shoulders, the breath she took, and then she turned. Her face was composed. Exactly as composed as it had been in the vestibule. He had an unsettling conviction that her face would be exactly this composed at the bottom of the sea. "You have left your own wedding," she said. "You left it first." "I was not aware that was a competition." He stopped a few feet from her. The lane was narrow, edged in dead bracken, and the sky pressed low and gray overhead. "I came to apologize. That is kind. You need not have followed me 3/4 of a mile to do it. A letter would have served." "I wanted to do it in person. You seem," she said, with a careful precision, "to manage rather a great many things by proxy." That landed exactly as it was aimed. He did not flinch. He had not flinched at an honest blow since he was 12. "Yes," he said, "I do." The admission seemed to cost him something she had not expected him to offer. She looked at him for a moment with the same attention she had given the room. He waited. He was accustomed to being read. He did not like it, but he was used to it. "What is it," she said, "that you cannot yet tell me?" "Several things." "Name one." He turned the ring over in his right hand, the broken one, and she watched the flecks of the damaged fingers. "There is someone in my house who should not be there. Someone with access to things they should not have. I have known it for 2 years, and I have been unable to prove it, and in the meantime the house has been slowly, not robbed exactly, undone. I needed someone who could see it, and I did not know how to ask for help without explaining why I needed it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Your man of business." He went very still. "The accounts he sends you," she said, "are not the accounts I was shown when your solicitor came in September. He showed me the September figures himself, I think to demonstrate the duchy's solidity. I compared them to the quarterly report your steward published in the Estate Gazette, and there is a discrepancy of roughly £4,000 across 3 years. I assumed I was mistaken. I did not want to begin a marriage by accusing a man I had never met of fraud." The silence lasted the length of a long breath. "You saw it," he said, "in September." "And said nothing." "You said nothing either," she said, "and it was your house." He looked at her, not the way he had looked at her before, from a window, from a distance, at an angle. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been searching for in the wrong light. "Come back," he said. "That is not an apology." "No, come back, and I will offer you one that has some thought behind it. There is a great deal I have managed badly, and I am aware of the list." His jaw moved. "I will ask Vivienne to leave the county. I should have done it a month ago, and I did not. Because I am not accustomed to asking. I have asked nothing of anyone since I was 22, and the last person I asked anything of died, and I find I do not quite remember the words. It was the longest speech she had heard him make. She suspected it was the longest speech he had made in 9 years. The November wind moved through the bracken. Somewhere above them, a kite called once and was answered by nothing. "I will come back," she said, "on one condition. Name it. You will tell me the rest. All of it. Not today, not at once, but in time, and not by letter." He held out the ring. She looked at it for a moment, looked at the imperfect hand holding it, the broken knuckle of the third finger, the old scar at the wrist, and she took it, but she put it in her own glove pocket rather than her finger. "When I have earned it," she said, "I will put it on." He said nothing, but he walked back up the lane beside her, and when the wind sharpened at the bend, he shifted half a step so that his considerable height took the worst of it, and he did not comment on having done so, which Cecily thought was the most honest sentence he had spoken yet. Agnes was waiting at the lich-gate with the expression of a woman who had lived through the previous hour by sheer force of hoping. She looked at them with a feeling so large it had no available outlet. "Well," she said, the guests are eating," the Duke said. Yes, they are. There is rather a lot of food." "Good," said Cecily. "Let them eat it." The wedding did not proceed that day. The guests did proceed to eat an extraordinary quantity of cold goose, which a man named Horace Timms, the butler of 40 years' service, superintended with the bleak satisfaction of a professional who has planned for every contingency, including this one. He was a small man of 60 with a face like an old boot and a manner of moving through a crisis as though it were simply a faster kind of normal. He had served 3 dukes of Aldenvere and had held a private opinion of all of them that he shared only with his cat. The cat was named Doctrine, and she had heard a great many things. Cecily met Horace Timms on her second day at Aldenvale Hall, when she arrived as a house guest rather than a bride. The legal and social logistics of this had been managed by Agnes with considerable ingenuity. Cecily was staying, it was explained, to assist with the household accounts at the Duke's request, which was true, and no one asked what else it implied, which was polite. The village had opinions, but the village expressed them through Mrs. Henning's dry goods counter rather than directly, which meant Cecily did not have to look at them. Timms found her in the steward's room on the second morning, already at the ledgers. "You've found the East accounts," he said. "Someone has been maintaining 2 sets." She did not look up. One for the Duke's Review, and one that appears to be the original. The margins are different and the ink dates don't match. Timms was silent for a moment. It was the silence of a man who has been waiting a considerable time to hear a specific sentence. "Yes," he said. She looked up. "You knew." "I suspected. I am a butler, Miss Vane. I keep the household accounts. The estate accounts are Mr. Renwick's province, and I have no authority to examine them." He paused. "However, I have eyes. And you said nothing to the Duke." "I said something to the Duke 8 months ago. He told me I was mistaken, with a kindness that suggested he could not afford to believe me." Timms moved to the desk and set a key on the blotter, a small iron thing, old, the bow shaped like a leaf. "The original ledgers from the past 3 years are in the box room above the dairy. Renwick does not know I moved them. I moved them the day after he requested access to the stored documents, in January." Cecily picked up the key. She turned it over once. "When did you know," she asked, "that it was him and not someone else?" "When he began eating less at dinner." Timms folded his hands behind his back. "A man who has secured his position eats well. A man who is afraid eats quickly, or not at all. Mr. Renwick stopped eating well in October, which is when, if I understand the timing of the settlements, he first learned the Duke intended to marry someone who could read accounts." Cecily looked at him for a long moment. "Who is your counterpart at the Renwick family property in Dorset?" Timms blinked. It was a very small blink. "A woman named Pels." "We correspond occasionally on matters of shared interest. Write to her," Cecily said. "I want to know where Renwick's money has gone." She spent the next 12 days in the box room above the dairy with a tallow candle and a notebook, and the systematic attention that had been her one reliable gift since childhood. She was not looking for fraud in the general sense. She was looking for the specific transaction that would be unmistakable, the entry that had been reproduced in both ledgers but with the destination altered, the one where the fiction had slipped. Renwick was careful. He was very nearly careful enough. But very nearly is not a distance that closes. The Duke came to the box room on the 4th day. He had to duck through the low doorway, and he stood for a moment in the dusty light with the look of a man who is not accustomed to entering a room where the person inside does not stand. Cecily did not stand. "Sit down," she said, "if you can find somewhere. There's a crate." He found the crate. He sat on it with the particular quality of a large man who is trying not to take too much space, which she found unexpectedly endearing. "I brought you this." He set a cup on the edge of the crate nearest her. "Tea, still hot." "Tim said you had been here since 6. "I have." She did not take the tea yet, because she had found something and she wanted to secure the thought. "Do you know a property called Haversham Hill?" "In Surrey. My great-uncle owned it. It was sold at settlement when he died, 14 years ago. The proceeds went to the general estate account." "Yes, they are listed in the current estate accounts as having gone to a property improvement trust in the Duke's name." She turned the ledger so he could see the entry. "But there is no such trust." I have been through the trust register for the entire duchy, and this name does not appear. He looked at the entry. Then he turned back several pages without being told to, which told her he had been thinking about this too. The money went somewhere, he said. To a property in Renwick's wife's name, I believe, though I cannot yet prove the destination. I have asked Timms to inquire through a colleague in Dorset. She picked up the tea. The sum is significant. When I have the full accounting, every divergent entry across 3 years, I think we will find it exceeds £15,000. He was quiet. She had noticed that he processed large things quietly. The worse the news, the less he moved. He was my father's secretary, he said after a moment, before mine. He has been in this house for 30 years. I know. She kept her voice level. The length of trust makes the arithmetic worse, but it does not change the arithmetic. He looked at his hands. The right one rested on his knee, the broken knuckle forward. My father trusted him with everything. When my father died, and there was a period when I was not well, for some time. Renwick managed the estate through that entire period without oversight. I gave him the authority because I could not. I was not. I trusted him because my father had. It was a great deal for him to say. She could hear the difficulty of each word. Then the fault, she said carefully, is his. I should have looked. You were grieving, she set the tea down, and you were being deliberately prevented from seeing what there was to look at. That is not the same as not looking. She found the entry she had been searching for before he arrived and marked it with a ribbon. Here, this is the one that will do it, I think. The Haversham sale figure appears in both sets of ledgers, but in the official set, someone has altered the destination in a hand that is almost but not quite Renwick's. The pressure is different. He was hurrying when he wrote this one. He leaned over and looked at it for a long time. You can see that. My father kept the parish accounts for 20 years. He taught me to read entries the way a musician reads a score. The pressure, the spacing, the particular way a man forms his threes when he is confident versus when he is not. She smoothed the page. Renwick writes a confident 3. This 3 was written by someone afraid. He looked at her then, not at the ledger. You have been doing this for 12 days in a cold attic. It is not so cold during the middle of the day. I could have, you could not have, she said. You could not have looked at these entries without him knowing you were looking. I am a guest going through old household papers. He has not thought to watch me. There was a pause. Outside something. A crow, she thought, crossed the small window in a dark smear. I was wrong, he said, not to tell you in September. She had been waiting for this, with the patience of someone who had counted stitches for weeks rather than ask for something they were not sure would come. Yes, she said. I was afraid that if I told you what I needed, what I actually needed, you would find it insufficient reason to agree. And I needed you to agree, and I did not want to examine too carefully what that meant. He was looking at the ledger, but she did not think he was seeing it. I told myself it was a practical arrangement and both parties understood the terms. I did not tell myself the terms were unjust because I did not wish to. That is more honest than I expected, she said. I am trying something new. She almost smiled. He caught it. She saw him catch it, the small adjustment at the corner of his mouth, and she saw him decide not to remark on it, which was its own kind of conversation. Renwick will know, she said, returning to the ledger, as soon as I have gathered enough to move. He will not simply sit and wait for it. He will move first. What will he do? He will try to remove me from the equation, she said. I am the only person who can read what I am reading. If I am discredited or gone, the entries become nothing but entries. She smoothed the page once more. so we will need to be faster than he expects, and we will need to have witnesses ready." He was quiet for a moment. "Lord Fenwick," he said. "He has been the duchy's legal authority for 30 years. He has no love for Renwick, and he has impeccable standing." "Yes, and the magistrate, and at least one person from the county trust who can speak to the Haversham settlement record." She turned a page. "I also want Timms present." He moved the ledgers. "Without him, none of this is possible." "Timms? He has been protecting this evidence for 8 months at personal risk. He will be present." The Duke looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. It was not admiration, exactly. It was something more like recognition. "I will arrange it," he said. He stood, having to fold nearly double to clear the beam. "Cecily." She looked up. He seemed to be working out the shape of what he wanted to say. "The ring," he said at last. "I understand that it is not yet time. I only want to say that I am aware of the difference between a practical arrangement and what this has become, and that I find the difference considerable." He left before she could answer, which she thought was probably wise for both of them. The letter from Pells in Dorset arrived on the 14th day. Timms brought it to the box room personally, which told her its contents before she opened it. She read it twice, which was once more than she needed. Then she sat for a moment, with her hands flat on the table and the autumn light coming through the small window, and she thought about a man who had stolen steadily from a house where he had been trusted for 30 years. And she thought about what fear smells like when it has been living in the body a very long time. She thought, too, about a letter. A specific letter, the existence of which Pells had mentioned in passing, a letter from Renwick to his wife's solicitor, written 2 years ago and kept because it had never quite finished its errand, in which Renwick described the current Duke as a man in no condition to verify accounts, and noted that this condition could be prolonged with attention and something administered in small regular doses in tea. Cecily read that sentence 3 times. She set the letter face down on the blotter. She picked up the Duke's tea, still sitting beside her from the morning visit. She looked at it for a long moment. She carried it carefully to the window and poured it out into the dead garden below without taking a breath until the cup was empty. The reckoning was set for Saturday morning, which was the 1st day of December and exactly 3 months after the betrothal had been announced, which gave the situation a kind of symmetry she did not trouble to find comforting. Saturday was also, by a coincidence that was no coincidence at all, the last day before Renwick's quarterly accounts were due to the Duke's legal representatives, meaning that on Sunday, either the report would arrive and no one would look behind it, or it would not arrive, because there would be no Renwick to produce it. She preferred to act while there was still something to act against. The witnesses gathered in the estate room at 10 o'clock. Lord Fenwick, who was 70 and had the patience of old stone. The county magistrate, a Mr. Drew, who had been told there was a matter of estate fraud requiring his professional attention, and had arrived with the exact expression of a man who has been told something he already suspected. 2 clerks from the county trust office, authorized to speak to the Haversham settlement record. Timms, standing at the door, with the composed authority of a man who has been waiting 8 months for this morning. The Duke stood at the head of the table and said nothing. He had that quality. The room understood it was his without his performing any part of owning it. Renwick came in at 10:10, having been asked to come for what he believed was a routine discussion of the December accounts. He was a slender man of 55, silver-haired, with the refined tidiness of a man who has always prided himself on impeccable surfaces. He wore the mild expression of capability he had worn for 30 years, a face that said, "I am at your disposal. I have seen to everything. You need not trouble yourself." He had worn that face while stealing for 3 years, and Cecily thought it must have served him very well. He stopped when he saw the room. Not a full stop. A slight hesitation, a man's foot coming down on ice and recovering before the slip was visible. His eyes moved across the witnesses in exactly the order she had predicted. The magistrate first, then the clerks, then Tim's, then her. His eyes rested on her. She met his gaze with the same composure she had given to a church full of people at a wedding she did not have. "Please sit, Renwick," the Duke said. Renwick sat. "I was not aware this was to be a formal gathering, Your Grace. It has become one." Cecily placed the 2 sets of ledgers on the table, the official accounts on the left, the originals on the right, the dates matched, the relevant entries marked with ribbons of 2 different colors. She had prepared a list of 17 divergent entries in precise order, each one identified by date, amount, and nature of alteration. She laid this list beside the ledgers. Renwick looked at the ledgers. He looked at the list. "Miss Vane has been reviewing the estate accounts," the Duke said. "She has identified a number of irregularities she would like to discuss." "I see." Renwick's voice was smooth as water. "Miss Vane is of course not an estate professional. It would be easy for someone without full context to misread the Haversham sale," Cecily said. The room went very still. She opened the official ledger to the marked entry and read the figures aloud, clearly, with the patience of a woman who has spent 14 days in a cold attic learning to be certain. She then opened the original ledger to the corresponding entry and read those figures. She placed the 2 pages side by side on the table so that the witnesses could see them. "The handwriting in the official record," she said, "does not match Mr. Renwick's standard formation in several respects. The most notable is the figure 3, which appears in this entry with a different pressure and angle than in Mr. Renwick's confirmed correspondence." She set 3 documents beside the ledgers, 2 unambiguously identified letters from Renwick's files, and the suspect entry. "Lord Fenwick, would you be willing to examine these and offer your observation?" Fenwick leaned forward. He looked for a long time. He was not a man who hurried his opinions. "The entries in these letters and the entries in the official ledger are not the same hand," he said. "Not in the 3s, not in the capital H." He sat back. "Someone else altered the entry," the magistrate said. "Someone else wrote it entirely," Cecily said. "The original entry, in the correct figure, is in the original ledger." Which leads me to the question of where the actual proceeds of the Haversham sale were directed. She took Pells's letter from her notebook and placed it on the table. "This is correspondence from the household staff of the Renwick family property in Dorset, obtained this week. It identifies a sum placed in trust under Mrs. Renwick's name in November of 2011, 3 months after the Haversham sale. The sum matches the Haversham proceeds exactly to within £30. Renwick had not moved. He had the stillness of a man who has decided that movement itself is evidence and who is therefore refusing to move, which is its own kind of evidence. Cecily let the room hold the silence for a moment. Then she took the second letter from her notebook, Pells's discovery, the one that mattered most. "There is also," she said, "a letter from Mr. Renwick to his wife's solicitor, written in the 2nd year of the current Duke's tenure, in which he describes the deliberate administration of a compound to the Duke in his daily tea, with the stated intention of prolonging a condition of, I will read his words, incapacity to verify accounts." She read the sentence aloud from the letter. She read it in a clear, even voice, without a pause. She looked up. Renwick's composure cracked at last. It was a small crack, a fractional change in the set of his jaw, a movement in his throat. But the room saw it, because the room had been watching him the way rooms watch things when they know something important is about to happen. That letter, he said, is... I would like to ask Mr. Renwick's clerk a question, Cecily said. She had not raised her voice. Renwick went very still again. His clerk, a young man named Poole, 23, who had been brought in 4 months ago, and who had been sitting in the corner of the room since the beginning in the official capacity of recording secretary, looked up. He was pale. He had been pale since she placed the first ledger on the table. Mr. Poole, she said, you countersigned 4 of the altered entries. Your signature appears on the official versions and not on the originals. She set the relevant pages in front of him. The legal implication of that countersignature is that you had knowledge of the contents at the time you signed. Is that correct? Poole looked at the pages. He looked at Renwick. Renwick said, with absolute quietness, you signed what you were given to sign. You have nothing to. He told me the originals had errors, Poole said. The room did not move. He said the originals had computational errors and that he had prepared corrected versions for the Duke's records. He said the originals would be filed for reference. He said, Poole stopped. His throat worked. He said the Duke preferred not to be troubled with administrative corrections. Cecily said nothing. Renwick said, with the last of his composure, that is not. What did you understand, Cecily said to Poole, the difference in the figures to mean? Poole looked at her. He was 23 years old, and he had the face of a young man who has been carrying a weight he was told was not a weight. I knew, he said. I told myself I did not understand it fully, but I knew. The magistrate made a note. The room settled into a new shape. Renwick had not confessed, precisely, but Poole had, which was the door through which everything else could walk. The letter from Pell's sat on the table with Renwick's own words on it, not an accusation, not a summary, but his own sentences in his own hand, written when he was certain no one was looking and had never imagined that anyone would think to ask a colleague in Dorset whether there was a corresponding property purchase. He had made the mistake of believing that the woman selected for a practical arrangement would be looking at the ledgers he wanted her to see. Fenwick said, with the authority of a man who has conducted these things for 40 years, I believe we have sufficient. Renwick turned to the Duke. His face had changed. The immaculate surface was still there, barely, like varnish beginning to lift at the corners. I served your father for 15 years, he said. I served this house for 30. I know, the Duke said. He was looking at Renwick with an expression Cecily could not fully read, not anger, not contempt. Something more painful than either. He trusted me entirely. He did. I know that too. And when he died, Renwick stopped. His jaw moved. The small tick she had noticed at the far corner of his eye, which she had categorized as a cold tell of a calculating man, was doing something different now. It was doing what it had always been doing, she thought, and she had only now read it correctly. It was the eye of a man who had loved her father-in-law with the particular grief of someone who was second to him, necessary to him, indispensable to him, but never his. Never invited to dinner. Never introduced as a friend. 30 years of service, and a man who could be dismissed without scandal the moment the heir reached his majority. She did not excuse him. She also did not hate him. The Duke said, You will leave the county. You will take what you have and go, and I will not pursue the matter further through the courts, because your wife is innocent and your children are young, and I will not destroy them for your choices. His voice was very quiet. The money you took was significant. I know what it cost this house, and I know what it cost me. I am not forgiving you. I am protecting them. Renwick looked at him for a long moment. I was afraid, Renwick said. When you came back from the north and I could see that you were capable, and that eventually you would look. I had planned to stop. I told myself every quarter that I would stop. I know, the Duke said. I believe you. It does not change what you did. He left 30 minutes later. Timms showed him out. The room took a collective breath. The magistrate finished his notes. Fenwick folded his hands on the table and looked at Cecily with the expression of a man reassessing a previous calculation. You will need a proper estate solicitor, he said. I am aware, she said. I can recommend several. So can I? Said the Duke. Fenwick looked at them both. His old mouth shifted at the corner. I believe you can, he said. Timms came back into the room and stood at the door with his usual expression of having managed everything and expecting no credit for it. His cheeks were slightly higher than their usual position, which was the closest thing to a smile she had seen on his face. The library is ready, he said. If anyone would like tea. He paused. I have made it myself this morning. The Duke looked at him. As I have done, Tim said, with absolute composure, every morning for the past 2 weeks. She understood then the full weight of what Timms had done, not only moving the ledgers, not only writing to Pell's, but standing between the Duke and his own tea every morning for 2 weeks without being asked and without saying so. She looked at Timms, and she saw a man who had been protecting the same house for 40 years in ways that never appeared in any record. Timms, she said. Miss Vane, I believe we could all manage a cup. He withdrew, but not before she caught the fractional elevation of his chin that indicated he had heard what she had not said and found it sufficient. The witnesses departed by midday. The county clerks returned to their offices with the relevant documents. Fenwick rode home in his old carriage with a look of private satisfaction. The magistrate promised to have the formal record ready before Christmas, shook the Duke's hand, and looked at Cecily the way men look at people they had not thought to look at. She was in the estate room alone when the Duke came back. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She was refolding the ledgers into the correct order, corner to corner, the way she always did with documents she intended to preserve. It is over, he said. The worst of it, she said. The accounting will take months to reconstruct properly. I know. She smoothed the cover of the original ledger, the one Timms had hidden in the box room in January, the one that had been the beginning of all of this. She thought about a man who had moved a box of ledgers because he had eyes, as he said, and she thought about 40 pounds a year and a cold that was coming and what it feels like to be the person nobody troubled to cross the room for. He crossed the room. He was standing quite close, which was not a thing she had accustomed herself to, and she found she did not step back. I want to tell you something, he said, and I want to be clear that it has nothing to do with the accounts, or the settlements, or the practical arrangement, or anything that happened this morning. She looked at him. His right hand, the broken one, was at his side. I do not know how to say this particularly well. I have not said it before. The muscle in his jaw moved. I am aware that what I feel about you is, it is not a practical arrangement. It has not been for some time. I cannot give you back the months that were managed wrongly or the start that should have been different, and I find that costs me more than the money. He paused. Marry me because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought of a vestibule in November and 24 stitches along a seam where no one could see the repair. She thought of a cold lane and a ring in her glove pocket, and a question she had asked him. What is it that you cannot yet tell me? She reached into her glove pocket. She took out the ring, the same ring she had returned to Agnes on the church steps, which Agnes had presumably returned to the Duke, and which the Duke had evidently been carrying for 3 weeks. She looked at it for a moment. Then she held it out to him. not on her finger, but in her palm. "Put it on," she said, "and then I will tell you what it cost me to walk back up that lane." He put it on her finger. His broken hand was very steady. "I knew," she said, "before the first bend. I knew before you called my name. I had known since the morning your solicitor sat across from me in Agnes's parlor, and I saw in his face that he was not entirely comfortable with what he had been asked to convey." She looked at the ring on her hand. "I came back anyway." Why? Because the alternative was £40 a year and Agnes's cheerful charity, until I found another respectable exit. She paused. "And because I thought there was a possibility that you were a man worth knowing, and I have been poor at predicting many things, but I have never been poor at reading a face." He was quiet. "And what did you read?" "A man who was afraid," she said. "The way anyone is afraid who has been asked to need something and had the asking turned against them." She looked up at him. "I have also been afraid of that." Something shifted in his face. It was subtle. She suspected most people would not have seen it, but it was the shift of something long braced finally permitted to unclench. "Then we will manage it together," he said. "The being afraid." "We will." There was a silence that was not empty. Outside, through the tall estate room windows, the first gray light of December was coming in low across the park, and it caught the dust motes above the ledgers and turned them briefly into something that looked like intention. She heard, very faintly, a sound from the direction of the library. "Was that," the Duke said, "Tim's weeping?" It sounded like it. "He will deny it." "Yes," she said. "He will manage it very professionally." They were married in the village church on the 23rd of December, which was a Wednesday, which suited both of them because a Wednesday wedding has no particular social weight to it, and they had both had enough of occasions. 12 people were present. Agnes wept openly and without any attempt at professional management, which made Cecily feel a great warmth toward her, and Mrs. Henning from the dry goods counter came uninvited and stood at the back, and nobody said a word about it, because she was 67 and had buried 2 husbands and had earned the right to attend whatever she liked. Tim's was there. He wore his best coat, which was his usual coat, but pressed with additional precision. He did not weep during the ceremony itself, and when Agnes made a comment about this afterward, he received it with perfect composure. He had, however, been observed by the second kitchen maid standing in the corridor outside the estate room for approximately 3 minutes the previous evening, looking at nothing in particular, and the kitchen maid had been sworn to silence and had told everyone in the house by nightfall, which was exactly what Tim's had predicted would happen, and was, he had calculated, the appropriate cost of the indulgence. Lord Fenwick stood with them, as witness and as something warmer. Poole, who had given his testimony and his resignation in the same morning, had been granted a reference by the Duke that was honest about his capacity and silent about his part in events, because he was 23 and had been afraid, and fear is not the same as character. Renwick had gone to Norfolk, which was as far from Dorset as it was from Aldenbury, and which suited everyone. His wife wrote to no one. His eldest child, who was 12, had been left at school and was reported to be managing with the quiet resolution of a child who has learned that managing is what one does, which the Duke heard, and which cost him something, and which he told Cecily about in the way he had been learning to tell her things, plainly, and not alone. The redeemable rival, Miss Forsyth, the magistrate's cool, accomplished niece who had been considered the natural choice for the Aldenbury match and had conducted herself through the entire affair with composed disdain, wrote a letter in January that was brief and precise and graceful, and received in return a letter equally brief, equally precise, and considerably warmer. By the following spring she was engaged to a barrister of good family, who read her cold intelligence as the most interesting thing in any room, which it was, and who was therefore exactly right for her. Vivienne left the county in December and went to London, where she was known and had always preferred to be, and where her beauty and her sense did not require explanation. The Duke settled something on her that was fair, and she accepted it without drama, and the subject was closed in the way things close, when both parties have finally stopped pretending the arrangement was something it was not. Agnes retired to Bath the following year, having discharged her responsibility to Cecily with what she considered great success, and which she described to every acquaintance she had as having been entirely her own design from the beginning, which was not true, and which Cecily permitted her to believe, because it cost nothing, and Agnes had been kind for 6 years, and kindness should be repaid in whatever currency it will accept. Horace Timms remained at Aldenbury for 11 more years. When he finally retired to a cottage on the estate that had been arranged for him with a south-facing garden and a reading allowance and the continued company of doctrine, who had outlasted all reasonable expectation and seemed to have taken the place of the cat she had once served, he left behind accounts that were immaculate. A household that had been run so well it ran itself, and a note in the estate file that read, "Inventory of the box room above the dairy has been verified, and the room is in good order." The key has been left with Miss Vane. He had crossed out Miss Vane and written the Duchess in a different ink slightly later, which told her everything she needed to know about his feelings on the subject, and which she kept. It was the following November, almost exactly a year after the morning she had stood in the vestibule counting stitches, that she found herself in the church again. Not for a ceremony. For an ordinary purpose, she had come to return a book of accounts to the church register, which she had borrowed in the autumn to verify a tithe discrepancy. She was wearing her better walking coat because the weather had turned proper and cold. The church was empty. She stood in the vestibule for a moment in the same exact spot. She heard the lich gate. She counted, without quite meaning to, the footsteps on the path. He came in out of the cold and stopped when he saw her. He was carrying a parcel under one arm, which she happened to know contained a particular item she had requested from a bookshop in London that had taken 3 months to arrive. He had walked from the hall because she had the carriage, and he had found he had something to deliver and had not wished to wait. "There you are," he said. "Here I am," she said. "You walked. You had the carriage." Above the porch, a rook called once. It called in winter, she had learned, more often than rooks are supposed to, which the village took as a weather sign, and which she took as a piece of local character she had grown fond of. He was looking at her with the expression she had first identified in the estate room in December, and which she had since found to be his natural face, the face under all the other faces, which was not cold and not grave, but simply private, the face of a man who had kept everything inside for so long that letting it out felt still like a controlled risk rather than a natural act. He was working on it. She was patient with it. Patience had always been her profession. "I have been thinking," she said, "about next year's timber accounts." "Have you? The eastern stand will need to be harvested before March, or the yield will be down again." "I have written to the new forester, but I think we should also consider," she stopped, because he had put the parcel down on the vestibule bench and taken her left hand and was looking at the ring on it, which was something he did occasionally with the focused attention of someone checking an anchor. "We can discuss the timber," he said in a moment. She let him look. The ring was warm. It had been warm for a year. He said, "Without looking up, I told you once there were several things I could not yet tell you. You did. I have told you most of them. You have. There is one left." He looked up. His right hand was around hers, the broken knuckle against her palm. "It is that I was not afraid of needing you. I was afraid that you would see everything I was, the grief and the paralysis, and the years I managed by standing at windows, and that you would find it insufficient to stay for. I read your face in September, she said, in your solicitor's parlor, and again in the lane. I know. What did you read? A man worth knowing, she said. I have not revised my assessment. He was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time in a vestibule on a winter day, with a rook calling above them, and the cold pressing at the door and 11 years of estate accounts waiting at home, he laughed. It was a real laugh, not the careful, controlled shift she had first catalogued in December, but a laugh with air in it, and warmth, and the sound of something that had been braced for a very long time finally permitted, at last, to rest. She thought, there it is. There is the one I was waiting for. She put her other hand over his and held it. If this story found you where you have been quiet about a cost you bore alone, if you know what it is to be read wrong for a long time and to bear it without complaint, then you know exactly what that laugh meant. Stay a while. The fire is on and the chair is kept, and there is no hurry here. I would love to know, what was the moment for you? The one that changed the shape of everything? Was it the lane? Or the box room? Or that last laugh in the doorway? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and your answers are always the best part of my week. If you would like to keep a place by this fire, there is a subscribe button just below, and it costs only a click to stay warm here. Sleep well tonight, and be gentle with the ones who have been counting your stitches in secret.